It wasn't the sound that scared Elias. In 42 years underground, he had heard the mountain groan 1,000 times. He knew the difference between the settling of the earth and the scream of a dying seam. No, it wasn't the sound. It was the wind, a sudden, sharp gust of air that blew out of the darkness, smelling of crushed slate and ancient decay. As the dust swirled violently around his cap lamp, Elias looked at the rookie beside him and realized with a sinking heart that the way home was gone. The mountain had just closed its fist. The alarm clock on the bedside table didn't buzz. It clicked, a sharp, mechanical sound that cut through the silence of 3:30 in the morning. Elias Vance didn't groan. He didn't roll over. He simply opened his eyes, staring at the ceiling fan that spun lazily in the dark. His lungs felt tight, a familiar heaviness that greeted him every morning, a reminder of the dust he had inhaled for 4 decades. He sat up, the springs of the old mattress creaking beneath him. Beside him, his wife, Sarah, shifted in her sleep, her breathing soft and rhythmic. He paused for a moment, watching the rise and fall of her shoulder. This was the ritual, the quiet observation of the life he was leaving behind for the next 12 hours. He placed a callous hand gently on the quilt, a silent goodbye, before sliding his feet into his cold work boots. The kitchen was cold. The linoleum floor felt like ice. Elias poured the coffee from the timer-set pot into his thermos. Black. Strong enough to strip paint. He grabbed his dinner bucket-dented silver aluminum box that had belonged to his father before him. It contained a bologna sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. The fuel for the machine. The drive to the mine was a blur of winding roads and headlights cutting through the Appalachian fog. The holistic emptiness of Logan County at 4 a.m. was haunting. No birds sang, just the hum of the engine and the distant, rhythmic thrum of the ventilation fans at the mine site, vibrating through the valley floor like a heartbeat. The bathhouse smelled of sulfur, damp wool, and aggressive soap. It was the smell of men who worked hard and scrubbed harder. Elias walked to his basket, suspended from the ceiling on a chain. He lowered his work clothes-stiff denim and a shirt stained permanently gray. As it chungered, the banter started. The younger guys, the red hats, were loud, cracking jokes about football and trucks. Elias stayed quiet. He nodded to Big Jim, the foreman, and checked his gear. His belt, heavy with the self-rescuer unit. His battery pack. His helmet. He ran his thumb over the light on his cap. It was the only star in the sky where he was going. He took his brass tag from the board number 400 none and put it in his pocket. The brass check system, 1 tag on the board, 1 in your pocket. If you didn't come up, they knew who to look for. The elevator cage rattled as the men piled in. It was a metal box suspended over a 1,000-foot drop. The gate clanged shut. The descent began. The light of the surface world didn't fade gradually. It was snatched away. The air pressure changed. Popping ears. The temperature rose. They were dropping into the gut of the earth, leaving God's country for the devil's living room. While Elias descended, the sun began to crest over the ridge, painting the West Virginia hills in hues of purple and gold. It was a beautiful place, a cruel paradox. The land was lush, green, and teeming with life. Yet the wealth and the death lay buried hundreds of feet beneath the wildflowers. Sarah woke up an hour after Elias left. She moved through the house with a practiced efficiency, but her mind was always partially elsewhere. Being a miner's wife meant living with a low-level, static hum of anxiety. You learned to ignore it, but you never silenced it. Every time the phone rang during a shift, her heart would stop for a fraction of a second. She walked out onto the porch with her coffee. The railing was warping, needing a fresh coat of paint. That was on Elias's list for the weekend. They needed the money. The pension plan had been slashed 3 years ago, and the medical bills for Elias's breathing treatments were eating into their savings. Retiring wasn't an option. Not yet. He needed 2 more years. Just 2 more years to pay off the truck and secure the house. Sarah looked at the garden. The tomatoes were coming in strong. Elias loved those tomatoes. He talked about them like they were his children. The earth gives us good things too. Sarah, he would say, it ain't all just black rock and trouble. She held on to that. She imagined him eating the sandwich she packed, thinking about the sun on these vines. But down in the cut, there was no sun. Elias and his crew were 3 miles deep, working a section known as the Boneyard. It was an old section of the mine, being reworked to extract the pillars of coal that had been left behind to hold up the roof. It was Kajed retreat mining. It was the most dangerous job in the industry. You take the support, and you let the roof collapse behind you, hopefully in a controlled way. Elias was training a new kid today. Caleb, 22 years old, with a baby on the way. Caleb was jumpy. His eyes were wide, constantly darting to the roof bolts, watching the slate overhead. Elias remembered that fear. It was healthy. The day you stopped fearing the roof was the day it killed you. Keep your eyes on the ribs, son, Elias shouted over the roar of the continuous miner machine. The massive steel drum chewed into the coal face, spraying water and dust everywhere. Watch the walls. If they start spitting coal at you, that means the weight is shifting. You move fast. You hear me? Caleb nodded, his face already blackened with soot, looking like a raccoon in the beam of Elias's cap light. It happened at 11:15 a.m. They were halfway through the shift. The continuous miner shut down for a belt change. The sudden silence was heavy. Usually, the silence was peaceful, a moment to wipe the sweat from your eyes and take a drink of water. But this silence felt heavy, thick. Elias froze. He tilted his head, listening. The air in the tunnel felt strange. It wasn't moving right. The ventilation curtain flapped once, violently, then fell still. "Grab your gear," Elias said, his voice low but sharp. Caleb looked at him, confused. "What?" "We just stopped for gear." "Now!" Elias barked, grabbing the boy by the shoulder. Then came the sound. It started as a low rumble, like a freight train passing miles away, but it grew louder, vibrating through the soles of their boots. The floor of the mine heaved. A bump. A release of geological stress. The coal seam exploded outward from the walls. "Run!" Elias screamed. He shoved Caleb toward the transport men. They scrambled over the uneven floor, stumbling in the dark as dust billowed up, blinding them completely. The roar was deafening now. The sound of millions of tons of rock surrendering to gravity. Timber props snapped like dry twigs. The sound was like gunshots. Crack, crack. Elias saw the roof behind them coming down, a cascade of slate and sandstone. He pushed Caleb hard, sending the boy sprawling forward into the intersection of the main tunnel. Elias turned to follow, but a massive slab of roof rock, the size of a pickup truck, slammed down between them. The shockwave knocked Elias backward. He hit the ground hard, his helmet flying off. Darkness. Absolute, total darkness. He gasped, inhaling a mouthful of thick dust. He coughed violently, his lungs burning. He scrambled on his hands and knees, feeling for his helmet. His fingers brushed the plastic. He grabbed it and fumbled for the switch. The beam flickered, then cut a cone of light through the dust. A wall of rock stood where the tunnel used to be. He was sealed in. "Caleb!" he screamed. "Caleb!" His voice sounded flat, absorbed instantly by the cold walls. There was no answer, just the settling of the rocks. The terrifying tick-tick-tick of the mountain adjusting its weight. Elias Vance was alone in the dark. Time loses its meaning underground. Without the sun, hours dissolve into an endless present tense. Elias checked his watch, but the face was cracked. He sat with his back against a coal pillar, conserving his light. He turned the lamp to the lowest setting. He assessed his situation. He was in a pocket, maybe 30 feet long. The air was still, which was bad. It meant the ventilation was cut off. He had his self-rescuer, which could scrub carbon monoxide for an hour, maybe less if he was breathing hard. He had to stay calm. Panic consumed oxygen. He took a sip of water. It was warm and tasted like metal. He thought about the porch. He thought about the paint peeling on the railing. "I should have painted that damn railing," he whispered to the dark. It was a stupid thought, but it anchored him. The hallucinations started after what felt like hours. It was the lack of sensory input. The brain, starving for stimulation, began to invent things. Elias saw movement in the corner of his eye, a shadow detaching itself from the wall. "Daddy," he whispered. He saw his father standing by the rib, wearing the old canvas cap and leather belt of the 1960s miners. His father had died of black lung in a hospital bed, gasping for air. "You diggin' deep today, Elias?" the apparition seemed to say. Elias shook his head, squeezing his eyes shut. "You ain't here. You're dead." He focused on his breathing. In, out. Slow. Control the heart rate. He remembered the safety training. Tap on the roof. Bolts. Sound carries through the metal. He found a heavy wrench in the rubble. He crawled to a roof bolt that was still anchored. Clang, clang, clang. Pause. Clang, clang, clang. The sound rang out, sharp and clear. He did it for 10 minutes. Then he listened. Silence. The despair was a physical weight, heavier than the rock above him. This was the miner's nightmare. To become part of the seam, to be buried before you were dead. He thought of Sarah. The phone ringing in the kitchen. The look on her face when she saw the company truck pull into the driveway. "No," he growled. The anger flared up. Anger was better than fear. Anger had energy. Not today. "I ain't done." He hit the bolt again. Harder. He hit it until his hands blistered. He hit it until he was screaming with every strike, pouring 40 years of frustration, back pain, and coal dust into the metal. Then he heard it. Faint. Distant. Like a heartbeat in the rock. Thump. Dot, dot, dot. Thump. It wasn't a hallucination. Someone was on the other side. The rescue took 6 hours. For Elias, it felt like 6 years. The air was getting bad. His head throbbed with a dull, rhythmic acha, the first sign of oxygen deprivation. It felt sleepy, so incredibly sleepy. "Just close your eyes for a minute," the darkness whispered. "Just rest." "Stay awake, old man," Elias muttered, slapping his own face. "Stay awake." He heard the drilling first, the high-pitched whine of a small probe drill penetrating the blockage. Then a hiss of air. Fresh, cool air blasted into his pocket. It smelled like grease and machinery, but to Elias it smelled like heaven. Voices filtered through the small hole. "Elias? Elias Vance? Can you hear me?" It was Big Jim. "I'm here," Elias croaked. His voice was a wreck. "I'm here. Jim, hang tight, brother. We're coming through. We got the loaders moving the slate. Caleb is safe. He's right here." Hearing that the boy was alive broke the dam. Elias put his head in his hands and wept. He didn't cry from fear. He cried from relief. The legacy hadn't ended in blood today. When they finally broke through, the beam of the rescue team's lights was blinding. Hands grabbed him. Strong hands, pulling him over the rubble, lifting him up. They put him on a stretcher, but he fought to stand. He wanted to walk out. He needed to walk out. Supported by two men, Elias Vance emerged from the mine portal. It was nighttime. The floodlights of the mine yard were blazing. Ambulances were waiting, and there, standing behind the yellow tape, was Sarah. She didn't run. She stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth. Elias limped toward her. He was covered in black dust, his eyes redrimmed, his body broken. But he was standing. He reached the tape. "I'm sorry, I'm late for dinner," he whispered. Sarah ducked under the tape and buried her face in his filthy work shirt. She didn't care about the coal dust. She held him so tight, he thought his ribs would crack. The legacy 2 weeks later. Elias sat on the porch. The railing was freshly painted. White it gleamed in the afternoon sun. His lungs were still rough, and he walked with a cane, now a knee injury from the fall. He watched a coal truck rumble past his house, shifting gears as it climbed the hill. The black dust swirled in its wake. He wasn't going back down. The doctor had signed the papers, total disability. Between that and the settlement, they would be okay. Not rich, but okay. Caleb had come by. Yesterday, he brought a bag of tomatoes from his own garden. He told Elias he had quit the mine. He was going to trade school to be an electrician. Elias had smiled and told him that was a good choice. Elias took a sip of his coffee. He looked at the mountain across the valley. It looked peaceful now, green and silent. But he knew what lay beneath. He knew the cost of the light switch on his wall. He closed his eyes and listened to the wind in the trees. It sounded different now. It didn't sound like a threat anymore. It sounded like a song. A song for the men in the dark. A song for the ones who came home, and a prayer for the ones who didn't. Elias Vance breathed in the sweet, clean air of the surface world. He was alive, and for a miner, that was the only victory that mattered.